Thank you. Right, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to the full licensing committee on Wednesday the 31st of March 2021. Before I just go to the agenda, I'm just going to read out the council members and officers present at this meeting. I'm Councillor Martin Johnson, Chair of Licensing. We have Councillor Tennant as Deputy Chair. I have Councillor Richard Taylor. I have Councillor Miss Tracy Austin. I have Councillor Mrs Elaine Blizzard. I have Councillor Miss Jessica Carrington. I have Councillor Miss Gillian Cruz. I have Councillor Nick Farmer. Councillor Miss Sandra Pickin. Councillor Mrs Catherine Scott. Councillor Andy Wallace, and Councillor Martin Ward. And obviously, as an observer, we've got Councillor Maureen Cummins, who's the portfolio holder of the department. As officers, I've got Chris Burnett and David Hollis, who are the licensing officers. Paul Jakes, who is our legal officer. Callum Malcolm, who's our committee services officer. James Lightfoot, who's facilitating the live stream. And we've got Chris Woodrow, who's here as a trade representative. If I've missed anybody off, please let me know.
There's myself and Jess Clark, Martin.
You just introduce yourself then, Andrew, please.
Will do. I'm Andrew Woodhead. I'm Neighbourhood Coordinator for Wakefield North Western Rural, but I'm here with my colleague Jess just to talk to the paper that's been presented to you requesting permission for a CAT for Horbury Green Park.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, we'll start the agenda. Acceptance of apologies of absence. Have we got any apologies, Karen?
No, I have received none, Chair.
Thank you. Point 2, to approve as the correct record the minutes of the meeting of the Licensing Committee held on the 18th of November 2020, pages 1 to 3. Is there any issues for people who would like to raise?
Move, Chair.
Somebody second them?
Second them, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, Chair's announcements. I have no other announcements for today's meeting. Item 4, to note any items which the Chair has agreed to add to the agenda on the grounds of urgency. I've nothing else to add. Item 5, Members' Declaration of Interest. Members are reminded of the requirement to make an appropriate verbal declaration at the meeting on any item or items on the agenda in which they have an interest. Having done so, members are asked to complete a form detailing the declaration, which will be available from the committee services officers at the meeting, which is Karen. Thank you. Right, moving on, item 6, and we'll go over to Andrew and his colleague, the Community Asset Transfer of Green Park, Horbury, pages 5 to 50 in your agenda pack. So I'll open the meeting to you now, Andrew, to explain why you've brought this issue here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Right, so Horbury Green Park is a park that's actually held by the council in trust. So unlike other parks that the council owns, which are owned by the council outright, and the decision for whether to offer the asset as a community asset transfer, which would ordinarily go through the council's asset management group because they have the authority just to sort of start the process. Because this land is held in trust, the licensing committee are the council's trustees. I know that you're trustees for a number of different things, and you are the trustees of Green Park, Horbury. Now, this might actually be news to you because, of course, as trustees for the park, you don't actually have to do anything until something like this comes along, when a decision needs to be made that we need to record just to give us the official okay to start the CAP process. Now, the community asset transfer process is something that exists under 2011 legislation, the Localism Act, And it basically says that members of the community, if they so wish, they can look into taking over assets and running them on behalf of the community. Now, we have had a number of groups interested in Green Park Horbury for some time, but one of the groups has actually approached us and asked us if we would consider releasing Green Park Horbury as a community asset transfer for them to look after, to maintain, and also to get some much needed investment and to put some play equipment and lots of other exciting things in the park. Now, the problem with this is that, one, we haven't actually seen a business case for this, but the other issue is that we do know that there is at least one other group that's interested in this park as well. And so that it's sort of fair and equitable. If we use the community asset transfer process, it sort of notifies people for a 6-week period to sort of raise an interest, and then we work with those people, and hopefully in about anything between 3 to 6 months' time, a second report will come back to you telling you what the outcome of that was and asking you to sort of give us a direction on that and to okay the decisions that have been made using the CAP process. And that is basically it. So as the trustees of the park, we really need you to just give us the formal okay to start the community asset transfer process.
Thank you for that, Andrew. So as I see it, it's very clear what you've said, that you just need us to say, yes, we approve you to go ahead with the first stage of this process. And then once that process has been gone through, you will bring it back to the committee at a later date for maybe members to ask questions or ask other items about it. So with that, unless any other members have any queries just to ask, can I agree that we support this and agree to move forward?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed, Chair.
Well, that's a unanimous decision again. So thank you for that, Andrew, and your colleague that you brought along with you. So that's approved and agreed. So you can make a start on that, and obviously we'll wait until the report comes back to us later in the year.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And if it's okay with you, myself and my colleague will leave the meeting now.
That's okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for that. Can I just before we move on, I've just got a message from our legal, but it's not come in my box to see. So I haven't got a clue what it is, Mr. Jakes.
I'm not aware that I've sent you a message, Chair.
Oh,
so
it just said something you were typing, so it might be a glitch. That's okay, Paul. Right,
no
so
problem.
with that, can we move on to item 7? The draft taxi and private hire licensing policy, pages 51 to 269. Now, before we start on this, I know it's a heavy document and it's taken many hours of reading and understanding. What we agreed, or I and Clive, my deputy, and the officers, we agreed that we'd do it in 3 stages. Today we just deal with the driver's stage, and then the next full licensing we deal with the vehicle stage, and then the next meeting the operator stage, because it's a big heavy document with lots of information, and we want to make sure we've got it right, that we don't approve it and then wish we'd have done something different. So I hope everybody's okay with that. No objections, we'll move forward with that, and I'll ask the officers, Chris Burnett and David Hollis, to outline this taxi and private hire licensing policy. Once they've done that, members can ask questions, and then obviously Chris, if you've got anything that you need to ask, I'm happy to take questions from yourself. Thank you. So over to you, Chris and David, please.
Yeah, it's Chris at this stage. Good afternoon, members. I hope you're all well. As the chair said, this is a fairly lengthy document. We're supposed to go through the first third of it today, and then the second third and third in the meetings. Could I ask you, first of all, I just want to say a few words about the reason this has come about. Can I ask you to all go to your agenda page 189 in your agenda bundle, and that is the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards document. The reason, whilst you go into that page, the reason this has come about is because under the Policing and Crime Act, the Secretary for Safer Transport can issue statutory guidance on how the councils exercise their function, in this case in respect of taxis and private hires. Now, there's been a lengthy consultations being done over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's resulted in the statutory standards being published back in July 2020. Now, this document, it sets out what the government expect the councils to do in terms of regulating and managing taxi private hire licensing. If you go to page 192 of the agenda, which is the introduction, and I'll go slowly through this because I know you're jumping through the page.
Sorry, Chris. Chair, I think Mr. Woodrow's not on mute because I'm getting a hell of a lot of feedback here.
Yeah, so am I. It's really quite bad.
Can Chris Woodrow, I don't know whether you can hear us, but I believe you're not on mute and we get a lot of background noise. Can you make sure your system's on mute? And
I will go on mute now, Chair. I'm not aware.
If you want to ask a question later, Chris, just put it in the box at the side, or if there's an issue, just obviously ask me and we'll go from there. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So at page 192 of the agenda bundle, at 1.2, which is the second paragraph down, that explains why what the Police and Crime Act allows the government to do, and also that it can set out statutory regulations which have a must-have consideration. So we must have regard to these statutory regulations once they're imposed on us. At 1.3, again on page 192, it does say, whilst the focus of the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standard is on protecting children and vulnerable adults, all passengers will benefit from the recommendation of and then further down in bold, it says the department therefore expects these recommendations to be implemented unless there is a compelling reason not to do so.
Thanks, Lord.
Okay. On page 193, and I make no apology for this, I think it's important that you understand the reason for this policy before we move on to the policy, and I'll only take a few moments with it. On 193, page 193, at paragraph 1.6, it does go on to say that the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards reflect the significant changes in industry and lessons learned from experiences in local areas since the 2010 best practice guide. It includes extensive advice on checking the suitability of individuals, operators to be licensed, safeguarding children, vulnerable adults, immigration, and common law police disclosures. So it's a fairly significant document. If you've not had the chance to read the whole document yet, it spans about 30 pages. It's well worth reading to give you a flavour of what the DfT are seeking to achieve with this guidance, and obviously expecting the authorities to follow what the guidance says. The final bit I just want to bring your attention to is the agenda page 196. I'd ask you just to flick to that. For me, this is the thrust of the DfT guidance. And the reason for us being here today is paragraph 3.1. The department recommends all licensing authorities make publicly available a cohesive policy document that brings together all their procedures on taxi and private hire licensing. It should include but not be limited to policy on conviction, sort of a fit and proper person test, licence conditions and vehicle standards. And then it goes on to explain the issues that have been written in other authorities, particularly the well-publicised ones abroad, and lessons are being learned from that as a result. what the DFT guide says at the outset is there must be a policy in place.
Chris, can I excuse me? I just come in there. I don't know other members are. It's an issue, but you keep going off and on. I don't know if it's some issue with the mic or whatever. If you can just double check. Thank you.
Yeah. Is that any better?
That's better for me. I hope everybody else has got a better sound now.
So that's the reason. That's the ethos behind this. So what we've done as an authority, we've collated a draft policy document. It seeks to encompass as many of the recommendations within the DFT statutory guidance. Some are already being carried out, some are already in place, some are already within separate policies. What this is going to be is an overarching policy which captures all the existing policies, but also embraces the recommendations made under the DFT statutory regulation. So unless anybody's got any questions about that, I now propose to move on. So does anybody have any questions about the DFT statutory guidance and the reason that we're here today and in the next 2 meetings? Okay, I'll take that silence as that we're quite happy with why we're here. What I propose to do then, as the chair said, is if we go to agenda page 61, and that is the opening of the draft document. What I will say just before we go into the document, it's actually been titled as the policy document, Statements of Licensing Policy. I would seek for your approval to slightly change the name of the policy. We've already got Statements of Licensing Policy, which is the licensing policy. So it would be appropriate at some point to change the name to the taxi licensing, taxi private hire and operated licensing. But we can deal with that as concluded. So the introduction to the policy. If we go to page 61, what this introduction does, it sets out how the policy will work. It says in the second paragraph, it's got immediate effect. It'll be applied to existing licenses and new applications received after the date of the policy is adopted by the council. And also it says the council reserves the right to overturn a decision that's previously been made or refuse a renewal of a licence where clear errors are discovered. Though we intend this to be in effect to policy made errors, we expect this policy to be able to allow us to go back and correct those errors. If we go further down the page to just above number 2, the 2 paragraphs above there, the policy sets out the requirements and standards that must be met. It exercises its discretion in carrying out its regulatory functions. The council have regard to this policy document. However, each application and process will have merits. And that's pretty standard in policies. And then the paragraph below says that we anticipate this policy, very much like the Licensing Act policy, will be reviewed every 5 years. However, if there's a need to review it prior to that, of course, we would look at it as well. So then the policy goes on to definitions, explains the definitions of what private hire and taxis are. And again, that's Chris, yes.
If I could just ask you a question, just to
yes,
clarify,
please.
It's Councillor Blizzard.
Yes.
What you've just said about every 5 years,
yes.
And I know further on it says that things can be looked at in between, just to make sure that, it's a really comprehensive report what's been written here, and we have tried to think of everything, but obviously things do crop up. If something does crop up in the meantime of the 5 years, have we got the ability to be able to change?
Yes, my understanding is we could come back to committee if it's something minor, and I think we'll discuss it at the end of the 3rd meeting with respect to that's all right. But I think in previous instances we've agreed that the committee can make minor. Sorry, the line of delegation can make minor changes, but anything significant will be something we could bring back to committee. It's a working document. Yes, please.
Can I just come in there, Chris? Yeah, and Elaine. Yeah, it's more or less. I would say it's like a living document. It's a bit like the LDF, although we're doing what we're doing now, but obviously government legislation could change, council policies could change, so obviously that would be amended as and when, but obviously we're setting a date for every 5 years should nothing change, but I'm sure it will. And if so, I think, like Chris says, it'll come back to the licensing committee to obviously remove Part A or whatever it is, and then subsequent put something else in its place. I think that's about right, Chris, is it?
Yes, it is, Chair. That's exactly where we should be. We would always look to review it. It's a living document, and we would always review it if the need arose.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Martin. I just wanted to make sure that it is a working document and it can be changed if needed.
That's fine, Elaine. As I say, it's a good document. There's a lot of information, obviously. There's a lot that we need to discuss, and it's great that people are asking questions. Thank you.
Yes, please ask as many questions. I'll always stand down if you've got a question. I'll deal with it there and then I'll do it. So whenever I quote page numbers, it will be the agenda page number, so the agenda pack number. So at the bottom of page 62 of the agenda pack, which is where we've reached now, we've set out the aims and objectives of this policy. The principal purpose is to protect the public and promote public safety. Again, this is very much in line with the Department for Transport statutory guidance. At its heart is the protection of vulnerable people. Any person under 18 is vulnerable to say. Anybody over 18 can be vulnerable, depending on what the circumstances around that individual are. So the prime aim is always to protect the travelling public and the vulnerable. So what we set out is 4 objectives. One is on the top of page 63, protection of the public, safeguarding children and the vulnerable, and the prevention of crime and disorder. The second one is the safety and health of the public and drivers. The third objective is vehicle safety, comfort and access. And the fourth one, the more recent topical one, is the encouraging environmental sustainability. Now, I don't propose to go through below there. I've listed bullet points of exactly what we're looking at under each heading. So right down to, if you flip over to page 64 at the top, that encompasses the bullet points that we're listed. So if anyone's got any questions about that, please ask me any questions. Otherwise, I'll move on. I'll give you a moment.
Has any members got any questions, or do you want Chris to move on?
Yeah. Page 64. Thank you, Chair. Again, so on page 64, cross-border hiring. Cross-border hiring has been mentioned previously. It is potentially applied. It's been a difficult process to manage throughout the country, where vehicles that are not licensed within our district can operate in our district. I won't go into details as to how it works, but it can be lawful for a vehicle outside of the district to drive inside the district. Under certain circumstances, it can be. The policy seeks to reassure that wherever possible, the authority will do its utmost to ensure that we try to oppose cross-border work wherever possible. The moment it's lawful, we're not saying we can't do it. We certainly have an eye on it, and we will continue to have an eye on it. And that's appropriate when we come across it. The benefit of the drivers working that live in the district is obviously the revenue is within the district, and drivers sometimes come upset with driving from outside the area, drive within the area and take the road away. It's been a topical issue for a long time since deregulation, but it's in there for a reason. Again, if there's any issues over that, please feel free to raise them with me. The next section, number 4, is delegations. Now, there is a scheme of delegation already in place for making decisions. It's not something that's on our agenda today, but if you do need to see it, it's Appendix N for November, and that's on the agenda pack, page 183. It's just one of the appendices, but there is a scheme of delegation for making decisions. Again, that's written within the policy. If we move to page 65, I'm going to go through all these pages. There's about 15 or 16 pages, then we can go into the meat and the bones of the actual conditions in the appendix. So, the driver requirements at the top of page 65. What the DFT guidance does, it sets out specific wording for the fit and proper test. Fit and proper, or more recently called safe and suitable. We'll come to that in a moment when we get to the conditions of the driver. But what we're saying now, the drivers must always be fit and proper throughout the duration of the licence. It'll be assessed on application during the licence and at renewal. We expect all our drivers to act with honesty and integrity, fully disclose all convictions, and that they maintain very, very high standards. And this policy does drive towards as many high standards as we can realistically achieve. And of course, it applies to private hire and hackney drivers as well. Now, the application procedure is set out. I'm going to come to that shortly. That's at agenda at page 84, which is Appendix D. I'll come to that shortly. We'll go through the detail. So the fit and proper test, according to the Dft Guidance, should now be without any prejudice and based on the information before you, would you allow a person for whom you care, regardless of their condition, to travel alone in a vehicle driven by this person any time, day or night? Now, this particularly for members that sit on committees, this area is quite important. What it says is all decisions on the suitability of an applicant or licensee are always made on the balance of probability and confidence. This is written into the book. Is the way it should be proceeded with. It means an applicant or a licensee should not be given the benefit of the doubt. And that, again, is an area that some members may feel slightly uncomfortable with. We mustn't give a driver the benefit of the doubt. If the licence subcommittee or delegated officer is only 50-50 as to whether the licensee is fit or proper, or in our case, safe and suitable, they should not hold a licence. The threshold used here is lower than for the criminal conviction. The criminal conviction, as I'm sure you're aware, is beyond all reasonable doubt. So we can use now information that goes beyond criminal conviction. You don't have to be convicted. You have to be considered to be either safe or not safe. And again, this is set out now in the policy of the fit. And at the bottom of page 65, it sets out as a policy the areas that we would consider when making a decision as to whether or not a driver is likely to be safe and suitable. So I'll pause for a moment there. That's the fit and proper test. If anybody wants to ask any questions about that area, I'll gladly answer them.
Chris, yeah, I have a question on that. So that regarding the 50-50 as to whether the applicant or licensee is fit and proper or safe and suitable, they shouldn't hold a licence. So that's not just for members to have that advice, but is it for officers as well when they're issuing a licence in the first place? Yeah,
very much so. There's a process to follow, Chair, as you know, and there's various elements that have to be completed. Myself and Dave are responsible for determining whether or not an existing driver, given a set of circumstances, should continue to drive or should not be renewed or should be revoked. And we also use the same standard. We wouldn't just consider that because a driver wasn't convicted of offence, he automatically he or she automatically becomes suitable. Even though the conviction isn't there, that doesn't mean he hasn't done it or the incident didn't occur. Means police didn't have sufficient information on balance the probabilities to convict him. But we don't need that standard. If we feel the incident occurred, but the police, so for example, in a sexual matter, for example, if there's consent, the police generally would not consider that to be a criminal offence, provided relevant circumstances apply, because there was consent. But in our circumstances, it's not the criminal element we're looking at per se. If a situation occurred in a vehicle we're uncomfortable with that shouldn't be happening with our drivers, then we would consider that safe and suitable. And we could, in some circumstances, revoke. So I hope that addresses the point there.
Yeah, that's fine, Chris, because obviously I would presume then if that were to happen, then they would then have the right of appeal to the magistrates court and onwards, yeah?
That's right. The right of appeal is the appeal right is within 21 days. There's a High Court ruling that says you can't go beyond 21 days. After that, so the driver must appeal within 21 days. There's two types of revocation, and I won't dwell on it too long. But one revocation is without immediate effect, so not in the public interest. So that means the driver can carry on driving for 21 days. He makes the appeal within 21 days. He can carry on driving until the appeal is heard at the magistrates. If, however, it's a far more significant, serious case, and we suspect public safety is at risk, then we have the delegated authority, as do the committee, to revoke with immediate effect on the grounds of public safety. Now, if that were to be the case, they still have the right to appeal the decision within 21 days. It has to be within 21 days, but within that time frame, they're not allowed to drive. The operative phrase there is with immediate effect. On the grounds of public safety, they stop driving there and then, and even if they appeal it, they're still allowed to drive. pending the court case. In the current climate, my case is pending with nearly a year old. But it's a significant decision to make, but the justification is it will be based on the fact that we consider the offence to be so significantly serious in the public interest and public safety to take him off the road. Again, so that clarifies that. Is that right, Chair, today?
Sandra, have you got a question?
Yeah, please, Chair. Well, he's already answered one part, that was 21 days when they go to appeal. I think we've all, as committee, and we've been on quite a few years, Elaine and Clive and a few others, that we've all said in our mind, if we come to that probability where it's a 50-50, would we feel safe if they had one of the members of our family in that car? And I've always gone on that from day one of being on committee. If I don't think they're suitable enough to take any part of my family in a car, then I would seriously vote no. And I know sometimes it is a balance, but you know, if they're not suitable for that, then I don't think we should have them as a driver.
Yeah, I think it's that's a very fair point, Councillor, and I think it's wise to just to make note now that almost all of our drivers are extremely good professional drivers. This is in no way reflective of the majority of the drivers in any walk of life. You know, there's always one or two people that do things they shouldn't do. So the taxi licensure is not different in that respect. But I think if it comes to a decision on whether or not you want to consider a driver to be proper, I would again always advise anybody on the committee or any of my colleagues to go back to the agenda back page 65 and just consider the fit and proper question without any prejudice and based on the information before you. Would you allow a person for whom you care, regardless of their condition, to travel alone in a vehicle driven by this person at any time, day or night? That is the most updated fit and proper test. And that's something I would urge any members to consider that's sitting in a committee.
Yeah, and I think this is where it fails with us when it's the cross-border thing. It's because our drivers have to go through our test and the English test and everything else that we've done. We've fetched that up over the last 10 years, and then we'll get, like we said, drivers who cross-border, and we can't do anything with that.
Yes, absolutely right, Council. And the Deregulation Act back in 2015, it drove a coach and horses through a lot of taxi legislation, and it did permit vehicles from, not just vehicles, but drivers from out of the district to drive within the district. And as you rightly say, Council, they may be higher standard than our district, they may be lower. The point is they're not the same standard, you know, whichever way they are, they're not ones that we approve. But the Deregulation Act and cross-border hiring does allow it to happen, provided certain circumstances that apply. The main one being that the operator in Wakefield must hold an operating licence in the district from where this, I say alien, the vehicle from out of the district, where that vehicle hailed from. That's the issue.
Thanks for that, Chris. I've got a question from Councillor Blizzard and then one from Councillor Farmer in the order, please.
Certainly.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Chris. Just going back to your 21 days, and if they do appeal in that 21 days, and we've stopped them from working, and the judge who they go to lets them work, can they claim off the Wakefield Council for putting them out of action for 21 days? And can they claim their wages from us, or are we in our rights to do that on good faith that this is what we believe that he ain't a fit and proper person to do that?
Well, it depends, Councillor. Very good question, Councillor. Very much. It depends on how this driver is going to be revoked. If it's revoked without immediate effect, he'll continue to drive. There's no loss of earnings, he'll drive. But if it's a revocation on the grounds of public safety, then it's down to the court to determine whether or not there should be a claim for loss of earnings because it hasn't driven. That would be determined, I believe, if the court decided the council were wrong in their decision and this driver's not being allowed to drive. But that would be for the court to decide, which is why it's so important that we assess the evidence properly as an authority and we make sure that it's a significant decision to revoke with immediate effects. We have revoked drivers with immediate effect. It has to be a serious matter because we're effectively taking them off the road. So the court would decide. In my experience, they've not made cost loss of earnings awards in my time in taxi licensing. But Mr. Woodrow probably is a bit more better.
Yeah, and that's what it's been since I've been a councillor on this committee, and I've never known us lose that many anyway. I can't remember any what we've lost.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Councillor Farmer was the question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Pickens picked up the question that I was going to ask as regards cross-border. If you remember all the problems we had with Rossington some years ago, it just feels that...
Yeah.
Rossendale, sorry, yeah, Rossendale. It just feels that unless there's a cross-border exactly the same standards, then we'll just get drivers registering in different parts of the country and then coming to drive over here anyway. So, you know, what can we do about that? Thank you.
A very good question again, Councillor. Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, it's driven a coach and horses through legislation. The ultimate solution would be a national standard, a national taxi and private hire standard, because if drivers were then driving cross-border, they'd all be licensed to a different standard, and that's something that's been lobbied with the government for many, many years. It's not been that is where it might needs to be. And without that, I think the councils in Bristol have to be very, very alert to ensure that operators that are using we call them out of town vehicles that are not licensed within this authority, that the operators are operating properly. I do think there's an element of I don't think there's a dishonest element in some operators. I think it's an element of not understanding some people. I think some just don't understand how it works. So I think there's an element of education element of it as well. Council, you're absolutely right. It is a difficult area, which is why we've raised it in our policy. We will do much to address it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks. It was breaking up a bit there. I'm not sure if everybody else could hear it because I was struggling to hear your answer to that.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
All right. Sorry. Yeah. In brief, it's just that the government are aware of it. They've been lobbied about it. There are circumstances where we can cross-border hiring is allowed. They're working from different authorities, but our policy sets out that our intention is to address it wherever possible and do as much as we can to prevent it. We can't prevent it, it's lawful.
Thanks for that, Chris. Some very good questions from members. So if you're okay with that, Nick, do you want Chris to move on?
Yeah, that's fine. I could hear them second time. It wasn't breaking up. Thank you.
I'll sit a bit closer to the laptop. I think I might have been sitting a bit further away. So we're at agenda page 66. And again, the application process. We're going to come to that in a moment. Once we've got through these pages, we'll go to the actual appendix and we can look at the individual wording. But there is an application process. Now, the council issue the council can issue license for a maximum period of 3 years. We can issue a license for lesser if we think that's appropriate. Now, the policy at the moment says that this draft policy says that applicants shall have a minimum of 3 years of holding a full driving licence issued in the UK. Applicants who hold a non-UK licence must convert that licence to a UK licence before an application can be made. Now, I think in the letter from Mr. Woodrow may want to make some points about this now, and I'm quite happy to listen to the comments that he sets out in his letter. At the moment, the committee have already approved, found out this morning actually, there was a committee decision back in 2011, and approval was given for a driver to hold a licence for 3 years before you can apply for driving a private hire. So this policy is very much in keeping with where we're at now. I know there have been some representations about whether 3 years is a discriminatory decision or whether or not does it defeat a purpose. So I'm quite open to any comments about that.
Chris, can you hear me?
I can.
Right, because it just went quiet to come back. Can I ask if members have they received the documentation from Chris Woodrow, the points he raised regarding the document? Do they have access to that document?
It's agenda page 229 is the letter from A to Z licensing, agenda page 229.
So just before we move on then, I've got a question from Councillor Cruz, and then I don't know whether Chris Woodrow would like to make comment on what's been said or he wants to wait well later. So it's entirely up to you, Mr. Woodrow, whether you want to do that. But I'll go to Councillor Cruz first, if that's okay.
Understood.
Hi, yeah, Chris. When it says that if they don't have a British driving licence, they must convert it.
Yes.
Does that mean that they then have to have 3 years British experience, or can they convert a foreign licence the day after they arrive here? Because it can, driving in this country from a different country, and I was just wondering whether it was a requirement that they had some British driving experience first.
The wording says applicants shall have a minimum of 3 years of holding a full driving licence issued in the UK. I would suggest it means 3 years driving in the UK. I think that's the idea behind it. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the case, but I'm certainly open to any views anybody else thinks.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going back now to if Mr. Woodrow wants to come in, but if he does, but just before that, if I have a view on this 3-year licence, because it just concerns me, and maybe legal can give us steerers, because I could have a driving licence for 7 years and never driven a car for 7 years. I could have had a driving licence for 18 months and driven every day for 18 months. So I'm just cautious of whether it should be 12 months rather than 3 years, because I don't understand how that condition makes any difference, because they actually have to do a driving assessment with the authority to make sure that they meet the driving standards. So I just can't get my head why we'd want to wait 3 rather than 1. That's my point.
I think just before Mr. Yates comes in, Chair, I think one of the considerations we gave when we drafted this was the standard of driving for you and I, the members of the committee, is a general standard. You get your test, you pass it, you're a driver. What we're looking at is drivers to be driving professionally, not just be a driver. We're expecting the standard. They already have to do a driving test. We're looking at the experience of driving. Once they get the licence, somebody who passes the test today, do we feel they should be driving private hire tomorrow? In my view, they need more experience before they do that, and that's the reason the 3 years was set. And of course, it was mooted at a determinate committee back in 2011 and set at 3 years.
Yeah, I can understand once you pass your driving test today, you don't give them a private hire or a taxi licence if they meet everything tomorrow or within 3 months, but they have to wait 12 months. But as I say, that somebody that passes the licence today could have a licence for 10 years and not have driven on the roads whatsoever. It's just they've just not had a car or done anything. But yet they could come in a period of time, and we'd be quite happy to send them through the process. Irrespective of that they've not had turned one wheel on the highway in 10 years, if you understand.
I do. I think, Chair, the difference between insisting on 3 years experience, if we didn't insist on 3 years experience, we'd be likely to get inexperienced drivers, where if we insist on 3 years, whilst we could still get inexperienced drivers, I think there'll be far fewer inexperienced drivers, because I don't think many drivers, I know there'll be some, many pass the test and never drive. I think it's more raising the bar as far as we physically can or physically can ensure there's stability.
I've got a question from Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, basically, my comment was has just been answered. It was about there's a massive difference between someone gaining experience driving over a few years. There's nothing like experience especially on the roads today, and I just feel that everybody has just been on about it. You must have experience. There's no substitute for experience, and it leads to what we call anticipation on the road. And my grandson's just passed his test 2 years ago, and he he only admitted to me just recently that he's learning all the time, and I just feel that 3 years is a good time. We had this conversation back in 2011, and that's when the decision was made to leave it at 3 years. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Richard. Right, back to yourself, Chris. Unless anybody else wants to ask any questions on this issue at the moment.
Mine's a comment, Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor Tennant.
Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Taylor about experience. I've been driving for quite a long time, shall we say, for the record, and I'd like to think I've got plenty of experience, but in all fairness, I've never driven on the right-hand side of the road. If I were to go to, for example, Spain and drive a car, I'd just start learning then. So it's about experience in our conditions on our roads.
Thanks for that, Councillor. I totally agree about experience. The point I was trying to make is that if you've had a licence for 3 years or 4 years, how do we know people have got that experience yet we're willing to give them a licence? Because they've got the paper element that somebody that's only driven 2 years, that's driven for 2 years up and down the country, we won't give them one, and they've probably got more experience than somebody that's not driven. If I can do, I'm just trying to get the balance right.
Chair, I'm happy to chip in there if I may.
That's fine, Mr. Woodrow, if you'd like to come in.
Well, Chair, I mean, I think you've largely taken the words out of my mouth. I agree that there's no substitute for experience, but the assumption that somebody that's got a driving license for 3 years has got more experience driving than somebody that's got a driving license for 1 year, for example, it's not doesn't necessarily follow. You have a driving assessment. That's the test for the standard of driving, and I think 12 months would be far more better for the time period a person should hold a DVLA license. They then have to pass a driving assessment to show that their driving is of the right standard. I mean, you've already touched on it, Chair, but if, say, somebody was age 50 and had had a driving license for 2.5 years, perhaps been working as a delivery driver, driving every day in real heavy traffic conditions, he would not meet that 3-year requirement. You could have a guy who's 21 years old, had a license since he was 18, never owned a car, never been on the road. It doesn't follow. So I would make the limit 12 months, but make sure that the driving assessment is fit for purpose and assesses the driving. That should be the standard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions regarding this? It seems to be quite a heavy topic. Right, back to you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. So at the bottom of page 66, the section then is the DBS, the disclosure barring service. An important procedure drivers have to go through now. The policy now sets out, as we have done for a while, for well over a year, that all our drivers now have to subscribe to the update service, which means we get updated information about any criminal activity. I won't go into detail about it, but on agenda page 67, halfway down, it explains the process. Basically, we used to check a driver's previous convictions on renewal, would be every 3 years. The Dft Guidance now says to be every 6 months. So DBS codes can be updated, check can be done every 6 months. And of course, if they, when it comes to renewal, just an update on DBS, it's a much more simpler process. So we're currently going through all our drivers. The ones that are up for renewal now pay the additional £50 to £11, and they go on to the update service, and that's information now to the update service. So we've been doing that for some time. It's now written into our draft policy. The guidance notes are Appendix D, but we will come on to those very shortly. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to take those questions, or I'm happy to move on. Okay, so bottom of page 67. Applicants with a period of residency outside the UK. If an applicant has spent 3 continuous months within the previous 3 years overseas, we now require evidence of good conduct from the country that they visited. This is actually already set out in our current suitability policy, paragraphs 27. But again, when we come to the Appendix D, we'll go through these in more details. I think at the last committee meeting, one of the councillors, and I can't remember who raised it, asked whether or not we would consider a licence for somebody who couldn't provide a certificate of good conduct. There are some issues with drivers getting them from certain areas. They find it difficult to get them. We would have to treat every single case on its merits. It's as bare as that. In the absence of a certificate of good conduct, we'd have to look at whether or not the driver could be. If we felt they did, say no. However, we'd have to justify saying no. So it's a bit of a grey area, is that, and we'd have to deal with every case on its merits. Fortunately, very rarely could but we would consider it. So does that, any more questions on that area? So let's move to agenda page 68. It does relate to the convictions, the suitability policy. This talks about the relevance of convictions and cautions. Everything is contained within the suitability policy. That's set out in Appendix D, and that is on page 98 of this disclosure bundle. But again, I'll come to that shortly. What it essentially means is we look at any conviction a driver may have, and it sets out a tariff or a framework. So, for example, a conviction for no insurance would mean we wouldn't usually allow a driver to drive for 7 years with offence of no insurance. If a driver had an offence of assault, it would be 10 years. And we do consider these offences retrospectively as they come up as well. The policy does give a caveat. It does give us an opportunity to consider whether we can depart from the policy, but be exceptional. The policy, for example, is there should be no period of time for a driver to be expunged from that offence and be permitted to have a licence. So again, that's set out in the suitability policy. Again, is there any questions about that before we move on? The next step, stage 5.6, is knowledge testing. Again, it's a prerequisite now of the obtaining a licence that there's certain elements have to be passed and have to be successful in achieving them. So one of them is a knowledge test. And again, the guidance notes for knowledge tests are Appendix O, and that sets out what we expect from drivers. So it sets out disability awareness, road safety, customer care, local knowledge, and this must be passed before a driver will be issued with a badge. These are all part of the application. And again, the medical assessment at 5.7, which is the bottom of page 68. Just 1 or 2 points here I need to raise. Drivers must have reached the Group 2 medical standard. That's the HGV, so the HGV standard. Usually they must have their own GP that does the medical and signs the form to say they conform to Group 2 standards. And our policy sets that out at the top of page 69. It goes on to say that we would permit another GP to complete the medical for the driver, not their own GP. However, the caveat is the GP must confirm that he's had signed the full medical records of the driver. He needs to see those before he can confirm written properly. And also the second paragraph down at 69, we've slightly amended the way we require medicals to be issued. So it's one medical to the age of 45. When they reach 45, it's a medical every 5 years. And then when they reach 65, it's a medical every year. The way we've slightly tweaked this is we want a medical every year from age 65. So if a driver has a medical at age 63, that's going to last him 1 year, 5 years, it may overlap. If he has a medical at 63, he may not need one until he's 68. well, from 65 they must have a medical every year. So despite the fact that our medical is 3, we still require annual medicals at 65 because of the risk involved and the age they are. And that's what we left out in the policy. These are just slight amendments. I'll pause there. Does anybody want to ask any questions about those points?
Thanks, Chris. No, I fully understand and support the reasons why you'd ask for somebody every year after 65, even though the medical for the age they were 63 would lap over. I understand that. But just before we go forward, I'd just like to go back to our previous point regarding the driving licence. Could I ask some legal advice from Paul? Could somebody appeal that decision to Magistrate Paul about 3 years because of the the reasons I put forward, other people, that you may have a licence but you may not have used it, but you could be just a good driver after 12 months because you've got to go through an assessment as well. I'm just wondering where that leaves us.
Well, yes, Chair, if it was in the policy, then the only challenge to the policy would be by judicial review. You've had proper debate regarding whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It's really ultimately a matter for councillors. It's not, I don't believe, discriminatory on age, because it could apply to anybody of any age, the fact that they haven't got a 3-year driving licence. So it's a matter for councillors considering this policy as to whether you consider it to be a reasonable requirement or otherwise. Clearly, in 2011, councillors on that occasion determined it to be a 3-year driving licence requirement, but it's a matter for proper debate.
Thanks for that, Paul. Sorry, Chris, back to you.
No, thank you very much, Paul, for that. And again, going through page 69, a third of the way down, holders of public service vehicles, PSVs and live goods vehicles, if the holder is able to produce proof of a current medical examination, they won't be required to undergo a further medical examination because they've already done the same standard for the PSV. We would expect them to produce the licence through it, of course. And then further down, we've set out in the policy that if there's any doubt as to the fitness of the applicant, this is about 2/3 of the way down, the licence committee, an officer authorised through the scheme of delegation, may review the medical evidence and make a final decision in the light of it available. Drivers can be suspended if the medical is not obtained, and there are specific conditions, and we'll talk about those shortly, such as insulin-based diabetes and heart conditions, where licensed drivers would be suspended. It's a state matter because medical. So we will suspend drivers if we feel they're not medically fit. And what we seek is they go back and get another medical. And once they get the medical, we know they're fit medically, and then they get the licence reinstated. I think that just covers where I wanted to raise with the medical assessment. 5.8 at the bottom of the page. As I said before, we can issue licences for 3 years or a lesser period if we think it's appropriate. An example of issuing a licence for a lesser period, which is set out in the policy, is, for example, if a driver had a right to work for 6 months, applied for a 1-year licence, would only issue a 6-month licence, pending continuation of the right to work. Wouldn't give a 12-month licence in line with what the right to work was. And then when the extension of the right to work appeared, we'll then extend the licence that way. So we do reserve the right. We have got the discretion to issue shorter licences if we think we've got. Again, if that makes sense, I can move on to the qualifications on page 70.
Is everybody okay to move on? Yeah?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I briefly touched on it before, but there's certain elements that must be completed now before the driver will be given a badge. And the most recent one, I think some members will have been in the committee meeting when we approved that safeguarding course should now form part of the application. You'll be aware that prior to that change, we were allowing drivers 3 months grace to get the safeguarding training done. And I think there was an issue. We have spoken with the trade about this particular issue. I think the problem in the past was that we were holding drivers back because there weren't enough courses to get them on safeguard. And that's why we gave the period of grace. We've now changed that. What we have planned to do is make sure there are more courses available, so there shouldn't be any people driving waiting for courses. I've spoken to the course that we will be delivering once COVID clears courses with classroom fulls. We can have restricted numbers now, and we'll also be doing an online refresher every 3 years as well. That's all being processed now, but it does now form part of the application procedure. No driver will get a badge unless he's been safeguarding trained, as well as the maths and English, which you may recall we've recently reduced the standards slightly in another committee meeting not so long ago. And of course, there's knowledge test, no other application elements that they need, but the safeguarding is included within that now. So some of you will remember some of these meetings. But, are there any questions on that area? And I'll take that silence as move on quickly. The conditions, the council may attach conditions to provide driver's license as are considered necessary. We will come into those in a minute because we're now going to go through the appendices very shortly. The conditions that are listed are indeed, and I know there's 1 or 2 comments that need to be made about those as well. The Hackney carriage conditions, you may or may not know, we can't apply conditions for Hackney carriage license, right? We have to use the bylaws, and the list of bylaws are set up. That's how we do that. So again, we'll discuss those very briefly. And the other 2 areas, or 2 or 3 areas left, is a dress code that we are proposing. This has been the cause of some controversy, some discourse and some discussion. I don't propose to say much now. We'll go into the Appendix F very shortly and go through what we are proposing. And I'm sure that will provoke some interesting argument and discussion. And very much the same with 5.12 at the bottom of page, agenda pack, page 70, which is the code of conduct when working with vulnerable passengers. Again, some very interesting and quite valid arguments have been put forward about that. So in a moment, we'll go through to those appendices and we'll discuss those in more detail. And other than that, we've touched on the renewal process at page 71, 5.13, the right of the driver to work in the UK. Basically, if there's no right to work in the UK, we won't issue a licence, but we'll issue a licence for the right to work, as I touched on before. And 5.14, the renewal process, the council require any driver wishing to renew their licence to provide evidence to confirm that the following conditions have been completed before a licence is issued. I know Mr Woodrow's got some comments to make about that area, and it's within his document, but I think we can discuss that as we come to it. Unless Mr Woodrow wants to raise it now, probably to raise it go through the appendices. That takes us through the sort of the preamble of what the policy is. Are there any questions about that before we actually go into the specifics of the wording of the appendices? Is anyone to raise it?
Well, Chris, I've just got a question. I know it's going back, but before I forget it, and it's one what Councillor Blezard raised about, it's going back to the driving licence, and maybe Paul can give us a legal steer. Non-UK licence that's got to convert into a UK one.
Yes.
Will they have had the UK one for 3 years, even though they've had a foreign one for longer, and they've held a licence? So I think we need some legal clarification on that, because let's get it sorted now rather than it come back and be an issue later.
Yeah, I think we.
Yeah, that's what I was saying as well. That was my point as well, Martin.
It was, and we touched on that as well. I thought we'd respond to that. My understanding of the conversion from start is, I think you can convert Because for my police stage, within 12 months of arriving in the UK, I believe you can convert to an English license within the 12 months. After that, an English license. That was my understanding of it. I don't know, Paul, whether you've got any other information about.
No, Chris, I think you confirmed it in your review that a conversion is then a license issued by the in the UK. So I guess any decision taken in relation to how long you have to have a license having been issued in the UK will equally apply to a converted license, if that makes sense. That's how I understood you explained it. And I you know, once it's converted, it's a license issued by in the UK. So whatever period is then agreed upon will apply. That's how I understand it.
Right. So I know this is, to me, it's just trying to get it right in my head. So again, we go back to the issue that somebody that's got an EU license or another foreign national license that's been working in the UK for 5 years, driving all over, converts it to a UK one, but then can't apply for a private hire or taxi driver's license because they haven't had it for 3 years, even though they've been driving for all the other number of years. This is where I come back to the you know, is it right to have a 3 years, 2 years, or 1 year? It's just getting confused.
The way it's worded is it's 3 years, a UK license for 3 years is the way it's been worded, but it's a matter for debate from committee members to decide how you want to approach it.
Well, I agree with Clive on that. I've never driven on the right-hand side of the road, although I'm an experienced driver in the UK. If I came over here, having driven from the right only, I would like to, you know, does that mean that, you know, once you change it to UK license, you've then got to drive for 3 years over here before you can apply for a taxi license?
Yes, that's the way it's worded.
Right, thank you. I think that's right and proper because it's different driving over here, you know, and you have to have that experience on the road to keep your passengers safe.
Okay.
Now I've got a question from Councillor Scott.
Yeah.
No, it's a comment really, Chair. I agree with Gillian. I just think we need 3 years. I've been abroad and driven on the other side of the road, and I've gone back to our side of the road on left-hand side, and had cars flashing at me to say you're not wrong side of the road. So I just think people need a lot of experience first, and you see it actually over here when some people are driving around a roundabout on the wrong way.
Well, we've had a good debate on that, and I think we've put that to bed now. That I think it's everybody's, or the majority of members that want to keep the 3-year license, so that's fine. I think I'm speaking for everybody or most people there. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it's the way I take it, the way it's been drafted.
Right, back over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Right, that's the first 15 pages of the draft policy. That comprises a third of the preamble. The next section, in the next meeting, we'll talk about the vehicles. But supplementing what we've just discussed in the last probably hour, and I'm mindful of the time as well, we now have the appendices, and the appendices set out the nuts and bolts, the conditions, the workings of how this is going to be managed. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With 6 appendices to go through. Some are very brief, some will take a bit longer. Appendix A, B, C, D, F, and G, and I'll give you the agenda pack number to go to. I think if we start at the back end, this is the areas I think are going to cause the most debate. Can we start with the code of conduct when working with vulnerable passengers? Work backwards. That's Appendix G, and that's at that agenda pack, page 125. I'll give you a moment to get to 125. Just to give you some background while you come into that. Of course, drivers already go through a safeguarding training course now, and as I've alluded to, that will now be before a badge is issued, they must be in possession of training. So they will have some safeguarding training. I've been on the safeguarding training course, does test what it's like, and I'm quite happy with the content of it. But this is a code of conduct. I see instances where, with drivers, where things they do are things that they shouldn't be doing, and I've wondered whether or not just a brief code of conduct would be appropriate. So on page 125, what it sets out with is a vulnerable passenger is a passenger whose age of disability means they're more susceptible to harm than a typical passenger. And I did mention previously, a few moments ago, a child under 18 will always be vulnerable. There's no other issue that somebody under 18 is a vulnerable person. But of course, there are people with vulnerability, and this is to address the code of conduct. What it does, if you see the second paragraph down, the code of conduct aims to promote good safeguarding practice for drivers and staff working with vulnerable passengers in the taxi or the private hire trade. And then it lists an area, or different areas, which should be embedded into working practice. And I make no excuse that embedded means we expect drivers to understand and make sure it comes wide with. So there's a list of bullets there that we would propose is included in a draft code of conduct. And if you take a moment just to read through all those, some are more onerous than others. It does go on to say that drivers must remain professional at all times, mustn't touch the person inappropriately, make offensive or inappropriate comments, such as swearing or sexualised discriminatory language, behave in a way that makes a passenger feel intimidated or threatened, and attempt to misuse personal details obtained by the business about the person. There has been an issue raised, and I think Mr. Woodrow might want to come in here because he did raise one or two points there in his letter as to whether or not it's reasonable to assume a driver will be aware that a passenger is vulnerable. And that's something which I would certainly stand out for a moment and invite Mr. Woodrow to make some comments, if that's all right.
Yeah, if you'd like to come in then, Mr. Woodrow.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, although I can see what the council's trying to do and appreciate what you're trying to do, it assumes that the driver will know that a passenger is vulnerable, and that is often not the case. There's no requirement for a person booking a taxi to disclose a vulnerability. Not all of them are visible. An operator cannot lawfully ask whether somebody is vulnerable or not. So it opens up a whole minefield of how does the driver know that a person's vulnerable? There are some that are blatantly obvious, I'll give you that, but an awful lot of them aren't. And about vulnerable passengers sitting in the rear, I think there are a lot of vulnerable passengers that would like to sit in the front seat. I gave an example of somebody with a guide dog where they often want to sit in the front seat with the dog in the footwell. And there are a great deal of wheelchair users who can transfer from a chair to a car seat. They find it often easier to get into the front car seat than the rear. Well-intentioned, I think this code would be very difficult to implement. Some of it just states the law. I mean, that a driver shouldn't touch a person inappropriately. Well, it goes without saying that's the law in any event. But I think the difficulty I have with this is that it assumes a driver will know when somebody's vulnerable, and I don't think that's possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Mr. Woodrow. Yeah, I think I note your comments and tend to agree with what you've just outlined. I don't know what other members think.
Well, I agree with it's not always obvious that somebody's vulnerable. It's a very difficult one.
Yeah. So on that, unless other members won't have anything else to say, can we amend that so it doesn't actually presume that people have to act, or an operator or a driver has to ask, or it allows a passenger, if they wish to sit in the front seat, the driver say no, you can't, because council conditions say I can't let you sit there. I mean, can those be reworded?
Could I make a suggestion, Chair?
Yeah.
It could be reworded. It could be struck out of the policy. It could be reworded. Is it something that we could perhaps add on to maybe the third committee meeting, and introduce it there and remute it once.
Yeah, not a problem. I think I'm okay with that. I think other members are okay with that, unless they tell me different.
No, I'm okay with that.
I think that's a goer then, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll reword that in a way that seems to address the concerns that are raised, and then maybe remute it, as I say, in the second or third meeting.
Can I just come back to Chris Woodrow then? Mr. Woodrow, are you okay with that next? It's more user friendly for everybody.
To move that at the third reading? Yes, absolutely, Chair. Absolutely.
Thank you. Right, Chris, back to you.
Thank you. We're doing quite well at the moment. Agenda page 124, which is the previous page, is the proposed dress code. I've not mentioned at all yet, and I do apologise. Within the agenda pack, there are the responses from the public consultation, as you recall, that went out to 12 weeks consultation, and there's all sorts of comments at the back end of the agenda pack. And there are some comments about the dress code. The dress code, the intention of a dress code isn't to require all drivers to wear a corporate uniform or a top hat and tails or something like that. What it seeks to do is to set a minimum standard of dress which reflects the professional nature that we expect our drivers to comply with, and also that public safety is not compromised. So we're talking about in our proposal, in our draft, that the standard of dress of drivers must be clean, good condition, and there must be good standard of personal hygiene. Again, this is not a reflection on how drivers are like. I'm in no way implying that the dress suffer or they suffer from personal. It's a proposal within the draft policy. It's the minimum standard that we're proposing. We're also suggesting as a minimum standard that males wear trousers and a shirt which is a full body and short sleeves. Kneeling shorts may be worn, for example, in warm weather. And as a minimum standard, females should wear long-legged trousers. Now, within this, we've put down kneeling skirt or dressed in a shirt. That may be something that's recommending that kind of thing. Maybe that wear similar clothing. We've got to be very cautious about how far we can go to instruct our drivers as to what they should wear. Similarly to footwear, we do have concerns. From my police days, I have concerns that footwear should be fit for purpose. And what we've recommended is it must go around the heel of the foot to make it safe for operating the pedal. And then the draft policy goes on to set out unacceptable standards of dress. And what we're suggesting is any clothing that's not in a clean condition, there's any offensive slogans or graphic on the shirts. We don't think it's appropriate to wear football and rugby shirts, tracks, that kind of wear. They must be suitably clothed and not naked. And again, they mustn't be wearing hoods that must be on the faces. And again, this is in no way a slur on our drivers. I'm very keen to the minimum standard. We're now looking at bringing in and expecting from our drivers because they are representing our district when they do that.
Chris, can I just stop you there because you keep fading in and out again?
I'm sorry.
But just before you go on, I've got questions that have been up a few minutes from Councillor Austin and Councillor Pickens. So
yes.
Can I ask a question in the order now? Because it might have been something earlier, please.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
I've got a couple of questions actually. I'm happy with the having a standard of a good, clean condition, and I'm certainly happy with footwear because I know in other countries you can't drive in flip-flops. I think from a safety issue that's really important. I have got a few issues around minimum standard of dress for males and females. We're not covering things like transgender, so what if a male wanted to wear a skirt? I think a minimum standard of clean and good condition, but I don't think we need to go into details such as trousers, dresses, skirts, whatever. And also in terms of wearing hoods or other clothing, not that obscures the vision. However, some religions do wear, are required to wear things on their heads and stuff. So I think we've got to be very careful here in not disadvantaging some groups. And you know, I understand good, clean condition, and I'm certainly on board with the footwear issue and anything that's offensive. So no offensive graphics and things, but I'm not so sure that I support the rest of it.
Yeah, the valid points, councillor, very valid points.
I agree with Tracy there. I think it applies both ways. Yeah, I agree with the appropriate clothing and that you should be appropriately covered up. But I've been in taxis with male drivers before where they've had you know, cargo shorts on that come below the knees. That's not offensive, but do they have to wear long trousers in hot weather now? And I think it's a very, very fine line. Like you say, some religions, they have to wear a head covering. We can't be too specific as long as we just keep it that it's got to be clean and appropriate.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Councillor Truss. Just before I forget, because I know Councillor Picking had a question, will you just put it on the block at the side for comments, because you're jumping in front of people. I don't want to get into bother for letting people wait and other members jumping in before them. Is that okay, Gillian?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Chair.
Yeah. Sandra, Councillor Picking, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It would just to mainly agree with what Tracy has said already, but I do agree with a minimum standard of clean clothing. Some of the taxi drivers you're getting are really disgusting. The big guys that's got the belly showing, well, I'm afraid it's really off-putting before you even get in. So I totally agree with the minimum standards of clean and smart. But as Tracy says, we know we have some drivers that do have the high abs and scarves on that need that. But I don't agree on the hoods neither. I think the hoods sometimes are detrimental. I've had some pick me up and you can't see the face because they've got an hood on. There's a difference between a lady having or the gents having the turbans and the hibs on, but having an hood on is completely wrong for me. So yeah, I agree with most of it. Chris, I think it's a good job.
Yeah.
And the shoes, the flip flops, and everything else.
Yeah, thanks for everyone's comments. Yeah, I think we need to be careful. Obviously, we don't want hoodies or baseball caps, because I think, like members have just quoted, people need to see, you know, a driver's face, who's driving them, etc. And I understand for religious purposes, a turban or whatever, that's part of their dress, and you know, to me that should be approved. But like Sandra says, you know, smart dress attire that's not showing stomachs or things like that. I won't use the term that Sandra used, but to be smart, because obviously at the end of the day, you know, this is an industry that we license, but it reflects on the council, and it also reflects on people visiting Wakefield, because they're like an ambassador to the city. So we want them to look smart, so people don't have bad views when they come visiting the city.
Yes, that's a very valid point, Chair. So to summarise, I think what members are saying is paragraph 1 is acceptable to stay within the policy, as is paragraph 2, apart from the 2 sections of as a minimum standard for male and female. We'll take those 2 sections out. Footwear, we're happy for the drivers to fit around the heel of the foot. And then the unacceptable standards, I think if I interpret it rightly, part A, B, C, D and E are all appropriate. F, there's some issues over F. I don't know whether or not it can remain in, but with an additional part put on that says, other than the wearing of the headgear for religious purposes, or whether it's just strike that out.
Just coming back to that, Chris, I don't know what the members think. I think it should be in the wearing of hoods or other clothing that obscures the driver's vision.
Yeah.
Or their identity. That should be kept in, because I think that needs to be in. I don't know what other members think.
There's a significant danger if headwear or clothing is obscuring a driver's vision. There's an obvious clear risk there. So there shouldn't be obscuring the vision. I'm thinking more in terms of the comments that were made about the religious headgear, as there should be a caveat just to include that at the end of it. Or just leave it out.
There's a lot of comments coming through on our box here. There's just one that I know Councillor Tracy Austin's about one there, and I think that would be part of the. Would that be allowed or not, Chris, in this?
Yeah, I mean that is the, forgive my ignorance, is the hijab the full face veil? Is that, am I right? That's the one, is it?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think we need to. We're doing the right thing by getting people to dress, smartly, etc. Because again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it just come back to the image of the council and what we're trying to promote. The industries out there, the Hepworth and the parks, etc., restaurants, and you want people to come and go away thinking, that taxi driver was okay, and the car was clean, and they knew where they were going, etc. I think that's all part of the image that we want to produce.
It is. It's set out in paragraph 1. Is the purpose behind it? So absolutely, Chair. Yeah. So are we going to leave F in then as it stands?
Well, I think the consensus is yes.
Right. I know Councillor Austin mentions would the hijab be excluded? If it's there for religious purpose, I think the only risk there would be is if a driver. I don't think we'll have any drivers at the hijab. If it is, we have to wear. I think we've been difficult to try and prevent wearing the clothes for purposes. It's not careful entry to that area.
Okay, Chris, back to you then.
Okay, so if I can ask you again, I keep flipping around these pages, if we can go to Appendix D, which is at the Agenda Pack 112, and those are the private hire driver conditions on the licence. And again, I think Mr. Woodrow's made some comments again in his, that sounded awful, I mean, he's made some comments in his letter about some of the areas here. So if I start with the driver licence, clearly you can't assign a licence to somebody else, that's common sense. Now, one of the areas that we're looking at is the display of a badge. Now, they must be visible. Passengers must be able to see the driver badge, and historically, drivers have tended to either wear the badges round the neck, or the ones that haven't done that sometimes have left them on the dashboard or in the glove compartment or wherever. But the draft policy is saying there must be a split badge attached to clothing in a prominent position, or a plain block-coloured lanyard around the neck. The third suggestion, which we're inviting members to consider today in the draft policy, is a plain block-coloured armband with a transparent part to be worn on the left arm, where a driver badge can be fitted into and is clearly visible to the passengers. Very much like the SIA. I remember pubs from many, many months ago. They used to stand outside with the badge on display. The reason for the left arm is obvious. It's visible to the front seat passenger, and of course the rear seat passengers will see it. And that's something that may provoke some comments. I think it's a suggestion that might be helpful to drivers. They're more likely to put them on their arm, put them in their arm pouch and leave them there and go back to the bow. But I'd certainly welcome views on that.
Can we give them the option to have a lanyard or on a suitable armband? Otherwise, it just seems a little bit draconian as what you've got to do this. Because I know why the lanyards has been an issue, but you can get lanyards, or you have been able to for many years now, that if somebody does pull it at the back, it's got snap points in where it breaks into two. So I don't think that there's a problem with people getting choked by them.
Absolutely not.
I've got a couple of comments now. I've got one from a question from Councillor Cruz, and then Councillor Pickens. So if we can have them in that order, that will be fine. Over to you, Councillor Cruz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, mine's about lanyards, Martin, because I was reading a report somewhere that there's a concern with driving and wearing a lanyard because if you do actually crash into something, then it goes into your midriff and it can hurt, you know, cause internal damage. So I'm more in favour of wearing an armband than I am a lanyard for that reason.
Thank you, Councillor. It's a very valid point again. And just to direct you back to paragraph 2 of the badge, just to answer your question, Chair, we have put in the draft policy drivers may wear the badge in the following ways. So we're actually opening up the lanyard, an armband, or the clip badge on the jacket. We're open to that. Are we suggesting that we should say no, only an armband? Because the point has just been raised, or should we leave it open?
Councillor Pickens got a comment, but for my view would be that you would give them a choice. I know Councillor Cruz made a valid point there, but obviously, you know, to insist that they have to wear it on their arm, and it's a difficult one. I'm all for something like this. I'd rather give people a choice rather than actually you have to have it on your arm, because if you have to have it on your left arm, and you know, will people that have had a drink or whatever, if they're sat in the front, will they start messing about with it or pulling it, where a lanyard's just a little bit further away? I don't know. Sandra, back over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was going to say what Gillian said about the lanyards around your neck, but don't our security guys on a night time have the big armband with the see-through pouch on and everything in that, which would be quite visible to anybody sat in front or sat behind, and it wouldn't hurt anybody. There'd be no offence to anybody. And I think that is the way forward, where they have their badge on their arm. It's easy.
It is. It's just that it's an alternative, that's all, in the draft policy. Strictly speaking, they shouldn't do it, but if they put it in the policy, they can do it, then they can.
I've got Councillor Scott wants to comment, then Clive.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with the armband. However, there's one question where if you've got somebody with disabilities, like we've talked about earlier on, if you've got somebody with sight impairments, how do we ensure that they know that they're getting it right taxi, if anything at all?
I would expect somebody with sight impairment normally to be accompanied if it's bad sight impairment. We don't currently produce badges that have the braille on them, so I'm not quite sure where we go with that one, Councillor. Are you speaking in terms of whether or not they can identify whether the driver?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking if somebody comes and if they've ordered a taxi and they're coming to pick them up, and they know how many times they're going to pack their own outside, or that if they've gone to taxi rank, how do they know that they're getting into the proper taxi? I'm just a bit concerned about that. That's all. And I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do at all to ensure their safety.
The only thing I've never considered before, Council, and again, it's a very, very valid point. It would apply whether it's a lanyard, a shoulder badge, or a clip. Any of those, it would be an issue for somebody who's partially sighted. The only thing I can think of is whether or not there will be a provision to put braille imprints on the card. But I can't think I've ever come across an issue like this. I don't know if you've come across in your wards as issue of partially sighted people having difficulties with tax. Not really come across it.
Can I just say that I've not known a problem, and I just wondered, and I don't think we have anything on our council badges, or officers don't, that deal with people with all types of disabilities, with partially sighted and other issues. So I don't know whether they've got a good working practice what they use for us to you know, duplicate that. But the problem is how big then does a badge become if you've got to have all that other information on it? I just don't know the practicalities of it, and just what all the members think about that.
I'm not familiar with any cases, but I've only been in the authority for 18 months. I don't know, Dave, whether you've had any experience of this before. Have you come across this before at all?
I haven't, no.
It may be something we need to take back after the meeting and consider what the issues are and whether there's any solutions to it, and maybe again come back at the next meeting with a solution to that if we perceive or the members perceive it to be a significant enough issue to be able to do something about it.
Just because obviously we have a transport department that uses in-house, and obviously the taxi and private hire side as well that will transport people with disabilities for not having good vision, etc. So I don't know what they have in place. It may be we could take something from there, but I think that's a difficult one at this time. I know Clive just put in for a comment, so I don't know what Clive wants to say.
Thanks, Chair. It's going back to the actual badges on display. Could we just state that it's recommended that they're worn on an armband for safety reasons? The recommendation.
Yeah, we could advise, could we not?
Yeah, we could offer the 3 as it's set out in the draft policy, but consider amending the word to say that the armband is the one that's recommended by the council. The only problem is if we recommend something and something happens and there's an injury, are we likely to become responsible because we recommended it? What justification have we got to recommend it?
Well, if we give three options, because the only problem is we're giving one option. If something happens and we need to change it for whatever reason, then if it's in the policy already, there's not a problem with having to come back to licensing or whatever. It's already there, and people can use that facility. So I hear what everybody said, but I'm of the view that you give them the 3 options that are there, and it's a bit like saying what tyres should you recommend on a vehicle because we think these are safer than others. I think that accidents happen with all type of manufacturers' tyres. So when you've got a Lonard or an armband or whatever, something could happen. But I think giving them the choice is the best way. That's my view.
Okay, so we're happy to leave that in as it is.
I mean, maybe Paul could advise whether we'd be liable or not. I don't know.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer. I think you just have to give a number of options as to where the badge can be worn. That will be my advice.
Thanks, Paul. And if you were saying, Chris, that a lot of them have them in the glove compartment, it won't matter.
My experience of taxis is relatively limited, but I must admit I've seen many drivers when I ask them where the badge is and it's in the glove compartment or in the side pocket, just give you a wry smile and put it on the neck again. So I know it happens, and by experience many times. And this would for me, the one on the arm is the best. It's one on the, but I do acknowledge that the 3 should step in if the driver's the option. Okay.
That's it. I know Councillor Cruz has got a question, and I know Councillor Cummins has just put in our viewing box 3 options, but stipulate that it must be worn, otherwise it will be in the glove box. I mean, I think we do that anyway, saying it must be visible to all passengers.
Yeah, it's in condition 2 on page 1. So it actually says the driver must at all times on a driving licence vehicle for hire or reward wear the driver's badge issued by the council on a prominent visible place on the outer clothing. Then it goes on to say they must wear them in any of these places, all which constitute prominent and visible.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Cruz? Have you something else to what you want to make us aware?
Yeah, it's just a comment. I've known a lot of taxi drivers that put their badge on a lanyard round the wing mirror like you would an air freshener. I don't know whether that's allowed, whether it's deemed dangerous. The only thing about lanyards, like I said before, that I'm concerned about is if the airbag comes out and it can push it internally and cause damage. But I appreciate that it is a driver's choice, and we are, if we start giving warnings, then we might be liable, and I appreciate that. So probably just leave it as it is for me.
Thank you for that. And I've got a comment from Councillor Farmer. Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think you covered it, Martin. Why can't we just say that the ID's got to be visible to all the passengers rather than stipulate it's got to be worn in certain areas? And I think you covered that, Martin, in your last comment before the last bout of questions. As far as I'm concerned, as long as the passengers, both rear and at the front, can see a picture of the driver, why does it matter where they're put?
Yeah, that's. Thank you for that, Nick. I think as it is, given the three options, I think that's the way forward. But as I say, stipulate again that it must be visible to passengers for them to see the driver who's driving is actually the person's picture on the badge.
Yeah, I agree with that, Martin.
Yeah. Right, back over to you, Chris.
Lovely, thank you, councillors. So, number 2, part 2, driver's badge must be returned within 7 days of expiry. These are standard conditions that appear on most licences. And if the licence is suspended, revoked, then it must be returned again. That's simple and straightforward again. Number 3, the conduct of the driver. Points 1 and 2. We're on agenda page 112. But on number 3, conduct of the driver, 1 and 2 are preempting of improving the code of conduct of the dress code. Again, they'll be dependent on whether the code of conduct of the code of conduct of vulnerable people stay within the policy. We've already moved to already. The other conditions are generally the conditions that do appear on licensing. These conditions have been lifted from the local authority and just slightly tweaked. So there's conditions about making sure there's assistance offered to the passengers, they behave in a civil and orderly manner, to ensure safety of passengers getting in and out of vehicles. They don't smoke, vape or use cigarettes in the vehicle. Drink or eat in the vehicle, play any radio. These are all standard conditions, and you may have looked through all these in the time before the meeting. The one area, if we go to page 113, point number 16, drivers must undertake an inspection of any vehicle that they are driving whilst working as a private hire. It must be undertaken at least daily and before the first carriage of fare-paying passengers in the vehicle whilst it's being driven by the licence holder. The checks to be carried out by the driver must include all vehicle maintenance items listed in the annex to the Highway Code, entitled Vehicle Maintenance, Safety and Security, and then check that all the signage and notices in the vehicle are all appropriate and the conditions of anything that requires things to be fixed is there, and then keep a record. Now this is a lift from another authority's conditions. I do appreciate it's very onerous, and you may have some comments about that particular condition that we propose. I know Mr Woodrow again raises that in his letter, and I don't know whether it's an appropriate time, Chair, for Mr Woodrow to address that.
Yeah, more than happy to do so, Chair. Can you hear me okay, Chair?
Right, Chris Woodrow, Mr Woodrow, yeah, if you want to address that, then I'll ask other members, and because I've got some views on that as well. Thank you. Yes,
I mean, the vast majority of that is all very reasonable. It was the requirement to do a daily inspection and keep records that seems to have caused the greatest amount of feedback. It refers to the Highway Code Annex. I mean, that Highway Code Annex that's referred to would require a driver to check his exhaust emissions, amongst other things, and clearly that's just not possible. It's one thing if you can clearly see your exhaust malfunctioning. It's another thing if it's putting out too much nitrous oxide or whatever. The driver can't measure it. I would suggest that it's probably better for the council to point out to a driver the sort of things that any reasonable driver would be checking before he starts his shift. A wander around the car to check his lights are working, check his tyres are in good order. The drivers I've spoken to fear that if they had to do a comprehensive checklist and keep a record of it, a written record, then they've got an extra 365 bits of paperwork a year to fill in and file. And I think there's also a difficulty with how it's imposed. If you attach it to a driver's license as a condition, you can only do that with a private hire driver's license. You can't do it with a Hackney carriage driver's license. If you do it on the vehicle license, the owner of the vehicle, the proprietor, might not be the driver. And therefore, how does he ensure that the driver's doing these daily checks? So I think it's more a case of approach it from common sense. This is what we expect drivers to do daily, and rather than have a paperwork exercise. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Mr. Woodrow. Yeah, I mean, I can agree partly with you that I believe that they should be checking the tyres, like windscreen wiper blades, etc., and the lights, because statistics tell us that when they've appeared for a test, they haven't actually been doing that. My only concern about, I understand why officers are putting about a paper trail, is that when vehicles are used by different drivers on a shift system, if something happened, they all tend to blame one another. And I think that's why this was put in, to obviously then you can identify when I checked it and finished my shift or whatever, it was okay, I haven't left it in this state type of thing. So I don't want it to be too onerous on the driver. I don't expect them to get under a vehicle or whatever, but I expect them to check the tyres are legal, the screen wipers and the washers are working, the lights are working, and when they get in the car, they'll put the foot on the brake and make sure the brakes, etc., are working. I think that's something that they should be doing anyway. It's maybe unfortunate that we have to put it in part of a draft document to make sure they do these items, but it is a serious weapon, is a car that's not fit for purpose on the road. So them are my views. I don't know that other members have got any views at the moment.
Yeah, I've got a question. Well, a question and a comment, really.
Is that Tracy?
It is, love, yeah.
Yeah, go on, Tracy.
As someone who undertakes a vehicle check at the start of every shift that I do when I'm not at the council, I understand it is a very serious and something that needs to be undertaken for road safety for themselves and for other road users. I do think taking out the vehicle and maintenance safety, the highway code one, needs to be taken out because that is too intense. But the basic one, in terms of, I check my lights, oil, tyres, brakes, that type of thing. Is there any chance that they could have some sort of app that could be done so that they're not having a paper trail, so we can go paperless, for them to show that they've undertaken these checks at the start of the shift?
Yes, we were looking at digital technology just prior to COVID coming in. Unfortunately, got help that we are still looking at whether or not we can have apps and use apps for various elements of licensing. That will be coming forward very shortly. It's certainly consideration. It may be members may want to consider rewording it again, but just listing the areas, such as Mr. Woodrow said, there's certain areas which they must pay particular attention to, such as the lights, the tyres, the wiper blades, will make it less onerous. In the absence of an app, it may be that we need to consider some kind of a booklet they can fill in, or is that going to be too onerous? Vehicle safety is important.
Can I just come back on that? Well, we undertake vehicle checks at the start of our shift, and they take 12 minutes to do everything.
Yeah.
So it's not taking too much time out of the day, and that's the checking ambulance. So checking a taxi isn't going to take, very, very much longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
And surely, in terms of a paper trail, surely the person that's driving that vehicle is responsible for that vehicle. So surely, if that person's using that vehicle all day, they'll be the responsible person, and the person that takes it on the next day will be then responsible for the vehicle. So I'm assuming there's some sort of crossover if the vehicle's being used on a morning by somebody and on an afternoon by somebody else. Is that right?
It is, Councillor, yeah, it is, absolutely. It may be the requirements that each individual driver keeps a record of his own check or her own check, as you could say, and then the new driver comes and recheck. I'm balancing up obviously the vehicle safety extremely important with how onerous is it to do?
Chris, can I just before I ask Councillor Farmer to come in, Chris, rather than have to fill some paperwork in, then would it not be able to be obtained if required via the booking system, where every car has a number or whatever, or a driver, so we'd know who were driving it at that time on that journey or elsewhere? So would that not be a paper trail for us?
It'd be a paper trail for which driver is connected to which vehicle. But I think we're talking about whether that driver has conducted whatever level of checking before the shift started that he or she has done.
Right. Okay, Councillor Farmer.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm not sure you need a paper trail, because isn't the responsibility of a driver to do all those checks anyway? If you're just in your normal car and you go, say, to Whitby or a long journey or somewhere like that, you automatically do your checks. So it's the responsibility of the driver, and there's no comeback if there's any faults on the vehicle that the drivers, i.e. Windscreen wipers, i.e. lights, i.e. Brakes, i.e. tyres. It's the responsibility of the driver, and as soon as the driver takes over that car, that's his responsibility. And I also would expect all the taxi drivers to do these religiously anyway. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Nick. Well, I agree with you, but I can assure you a lot of it doesn't happen. But can I just come back on that? Can I come back on that, Chair? Yeah.
And would you expect them, if they did a paper trail, to sign them and expect to do the checks anyway?
Well, I don't know whether a paper trail. I'm saying they should be doing the checks without us having to ask for the paper trail. That's the point. But
and the point I'm making, just because they sign a piece of paper, have they actually done the checks? So you'd expect to do the checks whether or not they sign that piece of paper or not.
Yeah, you would expect that, and I'm saying, really, the question is a paper check too onerous on the industry or whatever? And should we just put in recommend that they do the following checks, and then hopefully they will do it? Well, they should be doing it. They should be doing it without us even asking them to do it.
That's the point I'm trying to make, Martin. They should be doing the checks no matter what, whether or not you say do a paper check, sign this form, sign that form. Those are the checks they should be doing, whether or not they're driving a taxi or not. And it's their responsibility to do that. And I would expect all the taxi drivers to do regular checks on the tyres, brakes, lights, simple things that you'd expect to be done if you're driving a taxi.
You're right, Nick, but the documentation when vehicles are being presented for inspection tells you otherwise. That's the concern. Anyway, moving on. I've got a question or a comment from Councillor Cruz.
Yeah, I always check my car too, and I think it is the driver's responsibility to do that. I wanted to know, I don't know if it's possible, it's just an idea. Could it be if we get a report from a passenger of a breakdown or trouble, if we get a report from a passenger, that we can make it known that will be investigated and the taxi driver is culpable?
Well, I'll come back to Chris and maybe legal on that, but I think any complaint that's put forward to the licensing team, they will investigate it. But we're then hoping that the individual does report it, because unfortunately, especially on our experience and knowledge has taught me that when people have been for a night out or whatever, something happens and they forget about it the next day, it never gets reported. So if it's reported, I think that's the process it takes, unless Chris tells me different.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks, Chair.
Yeah, there is a robust system in place now that every complaint is recorded on the WildPack system with a consecutive number, and an investigating officer allocated to deal with it. All complaints are now linked to the allegation, whichever driver it is alleged to have committed it. We have a system now where we can just click on the drive and list all the complaints against that driver that's been brought in the last couple of years. So it's a fairly robust thing. If we just click on the driver, we know exactly what complaints are listed.
So going on this, can we then not ask them that before they start their shift, they make sure that the vehicle is roadworthy, and fit for purpose, and give examples of checking tyres, lights, washers, wipers, and brakes, etc. And then can we look at producing some sort of app in the future, just to try and move on from this, because it's getting a little bit bogged down on paper or not paper. If other members would like to comment.
We can certainly consider an app in the future, Chair. That's something that we're looking at, is digital apps anyway, in licensing in general. If I can just clarify before members making any comments, I'm feeling that this condition 16, the members are considering just taking it out completely because of the difficulty in recording any checks that are done. Is it something that you want to take out condition 16?
Well, we could take that out, but do we need to put something in that all drivers must make sure the vehicles fit and roadworthy for its intentions as a licensed private hire vehicle?
Yeah, it's something like that. We can, again, I can bring that back to the next meeting of rewording that to just explain that it's the council, the authority expect drivers to check vehicles every morning and ensure they're roadworthy before they start the duty. Is that what you're suggesting?
Are members okay with that terminology?
I prefer that, yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Anybody else? Clive, Councillor Tennant, are you okay with that?
Okay.
I've got I just got a message from our legal officer. Any condition should be enforceable.
I knew he'd say that.
No, so can legal look at something for it to be worded so that they know they've got to check the vehicle and fail? I'm not going to say the terminology, but I'm sure yourselves and legal can come up with something to put in there that's workable for the council and workable for the trade.
If I could make a suggestion, Chair, when it becomes enforceable, if one of our enforcement officers comes across a vehicle during the course of the day with a bald tyre, that tyre hasn't become bald in the last 4 hours. So I think the question, if this was in place, if a enforcement officer would say, did you do your checks this morning? If the checks include tyres, you'd have to say, no, I didn't, and it breached the policy. You still got the criminal offence of the bald tyre. But I do think to some degree an element of that would be enforceable. It wouldn't be enforceable for every breach. A light not working, or they were working this morning. But something like a bald tyre, I think, would be. It doesn't become bald.
Yeah. Can we go down that road then, I think?
Yeah, Chair, if I just come in, I put the comment about it being enforceable. Obviously, any condition that's on a licence, there will be no point in that condition being there if there will be no way of measuring whether it's being complied with. So even a fairly vague, watered down version of condition 16, I would still have some concerns depending on how it is worded as to whether it should be on as a condition or maybe just a guidance note. That would be my advice, but obviously.
Can we look at that between licensing and legal then and see if we can get something that can come back later in the year for that? Is that okay?
That's fine.
Yes.
Are members okay with that?
Agreed.
Yeah.
That's you.
There's not a massive amount more that I want to talk about to you on the conditions. Fares and fare cards is pretty standard that it's been on the previous slide. Conditions. Again, the section on agenda pack page 114 talks about passengers. They must have more passengers in the vehicle. These are all pretty standard conditions. The vulnerable passengers at number 6 at the bottom of page 114 raises the Equality Act duty to assist passengers in wheelchair. Again, it makes reference to the DDA 1995 and where it comes into These are all reasonably standard conditions that go on to licensing. So unless members have got any issues they want to raise about these particular areas, I'm happy to move on, but certainly I'll answer any questions just up on the day if there's anything you want to raise.
I don't know whether Mr. Woodrow wants to come in at this point, and if there's anything, any views or issues you'd like to ask.
No, I'm quickly looking through my letter just to see if anything else is relevant to what we've spoken about today, because I'm aware of the fact that we've got 2 more meetings, so I think I can remain quiet at the minute, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. There is a duty, there is an exemption for carrying assistance dogs as a duty. You must carry out an assistance dog unless you're exempt. And again, that what we're putting here is that in the previous, we've never had a time frame for an exemption, a medical exemption. I think off the top of my head, we've got 1 exemption for an assistant. What was put in here is that the exemption, medical exemption, every 3 years.
You're fading in and out again, Chris.
I'm sorry, I think it's the internet connection. Is that better?
A little bit, yeah.
We've put in the draft policy that the medical exemption for carrying assistance dogs should be renewed every 3 years. There was nothing previously. It was just an exemption. That was it forever. So we've suggested it should be every 3 years. If you're exempt, just get an exemption certificate. I think, Dave, you might correct me, I think we've got 1 medical exemption, or we haven't got any. Are you aware of any, Dave?
Yes, with 1 medical exemption. The exemptee has claimed an allergy to guide dogs.
Yeah, so it's not a big issue, is that? But what we've said in the draft is that we need to manage this. So we're asking drivers every 3 years to get just a renewal of the exemption, which we don't think is on. I don't know if there's any comments you want to make on that before I move on.
I've nothing. Has any members got anything to questions or comments? No, I think you can move on, Chris.
Thank you. Found property. I'll try and go through these reasonably quickly, but obviously you need to raise things, please raise them. The found property issue has been raised many times with me in the previous authority and here as well, and this sets out that drivers must ensure that found property is managed properly and delivered to the police station. That's set out in the draft. I think that's again becoming more standard now. The medical conditions, a driver must tell us without undue delay of any change in medical conditions. We have the right to suspend a vehicle. We have the authority to suspend a driver, if we of the view that medically he's not fit to drive. It would be a suspension pending another medical. Again, this is written into the draft policy. The convictions, cautions and arrests. We do have drivers, unfortunately, that have convictions that don't tell us about them, and they generally come upon renewal, by which time they've driven longer than they ought to have done, and they may have been suffering a suspension or revocation. There is a condition that they must notify us within 7 days or 3 days if they're arrested. That applies to any conflict with the police at all. And it sets out the time frames of what areas it excludes, Saturdays, Sundays, it just makes it more clear the time frames of what they should and shouldn't do. If there's any conviction, any caution, issue of summons, issue of fixed penalty, any harassment warning, arrest for any offence, any acquittal or a criminal case heard by a court, and it says the driver must notify the council in writing of any fixed penalty endorsed within 5 working days. And again, it just sets out the time frames for expected drivers. I think Mr. Woodrow did raise in his letter, and I think we've discussed it previously. There are differing time frames for differing matters. That could come to some confusion. It may be it's appropriate to try and standardise the time frames for when drivers must report matters to us. Is it more important to disclose an arrest than it is to disclose a speeding ticket? Again, if you feel as members that we ought to standardise the time frame, should it be 7 days for everything, which makes it easier for drivers and less chance of breaching it? it's a matter for yourselves as members, and I can change the time frames if need be.
Have members got any views on that, whether they should change it to standardised 7 days or keep it as it is?
The timeframes, the legacy timeframes, they've just been there and they've never been revisited really. So it might be an appropriate time to revisit now and say make it 7 days for every single offence, or is it 3 days? It's just have you got any views on the area?
I think maybe 7 days. For me, thinking about it, I think 7 days is fine. But I think if somebody's got arrested or by the police or charged, they should be reporting it to us as quickly as possible. And I don't know what members' views are, or whether it's within 24 hours or maybe that's difficult if it happens on a Friday, within 3 days, maybe for them type of offences. Those are my views, thinking out loud. I'm getting some points here. Leave it as it is. Happy as it is. So, are all members of that view?
Fine.
It looks like we're leaving it as it is. Chris.
Fine, thank you. Moving to agenda page 116. Change of operator. They must notify. These are all standard conditions. Change of address. The maximum daily driving time is 9 hours. Drivers must have a break lasting at least 45 minutes. These are all health and safety issues incorporated within the conditions of the licence. The customer and other personal information. Again, quite an important area that is the information. Drivers, operators have got access to some very, very sensitive information. This sets out how they must hold it, and they mustn't disclose and disseminate it for anyone else or use it. The next section covers when licensed drivers not utilising their licences for an extended period of time. This is at the bottom of page 116. If circumstances are such that a licensed driver doesn't intend to work as a private hire driver for a period exceeding 4 months, they must surrender the licence to the council. It must be surrendered as it becomes clear the holder will not be working for a period of time. Then it will be suspended as such time as the holder is in a position to commence work. And that again is pretty standard in licence. Page 117. Again, drivers must cooperate with us on all we ask them to. Again, the appearance of the driver. If the driver grows a beard, changes their ID in any way, they must notify us and give us a photograph of the new identity. The next section on 117 covers the accidents, when they must be reported. Just quickly looking through, there's really nothing that I really want to raise with you that you may not be aware of, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions. That concludes the conditions, the new revised conditions. I'm aware there's about 5 pages, 6 pages, but we have moved to the majority, and I think the majority are relevant. So I welcome any questions if you want to raise any.
Thank you for that, Chris. Just on drivers, when they've got to come and get a new badge, change the looks regarding task, etc. Do we keep a record then of how many badges they've had, say, in a 12-month period? So, and do we ask for the old one back if it's not lost?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, the old one is returned and the new one's issued. There's a record of back of all the transactions.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions for Chris?
Can I just ask, how long does it take for the replacement badge to come through? All I'm asking for is, you know, the November, when if some men will grow a beard or a tash just for November time, would they have to come forward?
In this policy, yes, they would. It's a simple process. A badge. COVID has slowed things down. Obviously, we're posting badges out. We did have a backlog last year of badges because of COVID. We've caught up on that. A badge can be processed in straight away and posted out, or after COVID's lifted, you can come in and have one done straight away. it's not a big issue printing money. So very straightforward.
Okay, thank you. I'm just thinking they only grow it for a month and then it's off.
I think what will happen in real terms is the driver would grow it, and by the time November's finished and they shave it off, we would know not one way or the other. I think it'd only become an issue if that driver was involved in something in that particular month and it was flagged that actually doesn't look like he does on his photograph. But I think if the policy says you must change it, that the onus is on him to change it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Right, Chris, back to you.
Yeah, we're very much ahead of where I wanted to be now. But the reason I did it back to front is because the Appendix C, B and A are all pretty standard. Appendix C, which is the driver suitability, is at the agenda pack, page 98. Now that's something that's already been approved. It was approved in 2019, I think it was. And it's something that we deal with almost on a day-to-day basis. They're going to deal with one tomorrow. It's been in place for a long time, and it was the one that was recommended. The combined authorities adopted the same one, and there's not an awful lot to say about it. It's already in place, and we feel that it's suitable for what we do. It sets out, as I said before, the offences that need to be considered in the period of time. Things like that. So it's already in place. So happy to take any questions on it.
I have no questions on that. If it's robust and it's doing what it's doing, why tinker with it? Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I think Mr. Woodrow had something in his letter about it. I don't know if that's correct, Mr. Woodrow.
I'm just looking through now, Chris, as you speak. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry, my letter wasn't broken down into sort of vehicle operator and driver, so I'm just. No, was this the what we would call the convictions policy?
It is, yes.
I mean, it was just. I know why the council introduced it. The guidance was given from the Institute of Licensing. I do think the guidance by the Institute of Licensing was difficult to follow because it sometimes groups people all into one category. And I give an example in the letter that dishonesty offences, for example, somebody not be licensed if they've had an offence of dishonesty for 7 years. But it doesn't look in enough detail at what those offences are. So, for example, and I give this example in my letter, the Institute of Licensing guidance treats somebody who is a juvenile convicted of stealing sweets exactly the same as somebody who was involved in the Hatton Garden safe robbery. Both dishonesty, therefore 7 years applies, and it can't be right to treat those two things the same. I think it just needs to be fine-tuned so that there's some scrutiny as to what these things mean, rather than just lumping everybody into one general category of dishonesty and saying that juvenile who stole sweets a couple of years ago is treated exactly the same as this career criminal who was involved in a multi-million-pound robbery. And that's in my letter, that exact example, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mr. Woodrow. So, Chris, on that count, would we ask for supplementary evidence or details of that offence to obviously disenfranchise what Mr. Woodrow's just said about the same offence but completely different?
Yeah, every case is dealt with on its merit, always. When we look at the, we have the authority to depart from the policy because it's 7 years. For, say, for example, an offence of violence is 10 years. We would look at the offence, what it was, the nature of the offence. We have an information sharing agreement with the police. The police would give us the information, and we'd consider and determine the application. We have the authority to depart from the policy if we feel the circumstances are exceptional. I personally think it is fit for purpose. I think there's been some very, very good determination, some very robust determinations made by the council in the last 12 months. And I do think, as it stands, we do treat cases as on each individual basis.
So that happens now when officers are making a decision. They will ask for evidence to the reasons how X or Y happened, and then that may have a different outcome on a decision. Yeah.
Well, the starting point is the suitability policy. If it says an offence of violence is you can't renew a licence or issue a licence 10 years, then that's the starting point. But what we do, just to satisfy members' curiosity, what we would do with, for example, a renewal, if we had a renewal and somebody had a conviction for an assault that was 9 years ago, and that was determined 9 years ago under the old suitability policy, because it's now captured under the new policy, because it's 10 years and not, I think, 5 years ago or 3 years, it's now 10 years, we have to revisit it. But we can consider the effect. It's maybe 9 years since the assault, captured by the new offence. We'll go to the police and get the information from the police. They disclose the information of the offence. We would invite the driver to give us an account of what happened. Often he would give us the account that he gave 9 years ago, and then we'd sit down and determine if we feel that over the span of 9 years, that it's already been determined once, it's been dealt with once 9 years ago, there's been no more offences since, and we feel there's sufficient to depart from the policy. And we've the authority to say, whilst it's within the 10 years, we think it's appropriate to renew the licence because of the particular circumstances of that driver. So whilst it's there and it's robust, we do have an ability to depart, but justify why we depart.
So on what's just been said by yourself and Mr. Woodrow, it's not a blanket policy as it may look. You're looking at other evidence as well on the balance of that evidence, whether you would grant or refuse a licence, yeah? Yeah,
we wouldn't just say 10 years, you're not having one. We'd have to look at the evidence, and the starting point would always be the policy. 10 years, you're not going to get one. That's how we start. And then we work backwards. Well, when was it? Was it determined? What was dealt with it? What's been the history since? And then combining all that information, do we have sufficient evidence here to say, actually, it's appropriate that although it's within the 10 years, we can depart from that policy because of specific circumstances.
I've just got a question from Mr. Woodrow on my PC. He's asking, is that on new applications as well as renewals? And Paul Jakes has just replied, yes, see paragraphs 15 and 16. So
thank you, Paul.
Thank you. So, I mean, I'm happy for it to carry on with that information. I think it gives officers the opportunity to look at it on its merits, and I think that's a fair way of going ahead on things. I hope other members agree or don't.
I hope that's explained and given some clarity to the way we approach it.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think the concern was that if it said 10 years, you can't have one for this offence. It applied to A, B, C, and D, even though they all may be different circumstances, and you look at them individually.
Absolutely, yeah. And the history and the time frames, whether it was dealt with before. So many variable factors that you can't given by the driver if he's being honest with his accounts, and there's all sorts of elements to consider.
Thank you for that, Chris. So we move on. Okay, everybody's agreeing.
Yeah, and as I said, the rest of it is fairly straightforward. We touched on it at the beginning. Appendix D is simply a guide to DBS checks. It's listed at 92 of the disclosure book. It literally is a document which explains to drivers how the DBS process works. It spans over a few pages. It's something that it's the guide to the drivers to let them know what the DBS is, what the background is, and how you register. And it gives them specific links. We felt it was probably a good place to put in policy for drivers that are unsure what to do in the policy, the appendix in the policy. So I don't propose to go through that unless members have got any questions about this. Is just a guidance.
Is everybody okay with that? Any questions or comments for this? I think everybody's saying okay.
Lovely. And again, the application process, Appendix A, and that's the agenda pack, page 84. Similar thing again, it's the application process, and it explains to drivers when they go on it what the process is, what the safeguard training is, what the medical requirements are, what the practical driving test is. Again, it's the guide of, for example, if you go to page 87, it tells you the maths and English assessment and sets out who you have to contact to arrange for that. It's almost like an assistance for the drivers. And again, we felt that was probably appropriate to put it in the policy, just to assist drivers. At page 90, agenda page 90, we've incorporated the safeguarding training in there as well. The safeguarding training must be all part of the application procedure as well. So again, it's a fairly straightforward document, but I'll be very happy to answer any questions. It's more for guidance for driving. And this is the reason I did this back to front, is that the end of the procedure is fairly straightforward.
Just a question from me, Chris. In that that training guide and what for drivers, and I don't know whether it has to be in here or it's elsewhere, does it say that the cost is for them to pay, or is it included in the licence fee?
Which page are you on, sorry, Chair?
I'm just going on the page 87, you know, with blue lamp truck, things like that. Does it need to say in here that the cost is for themselves, or is it all included in the licence? Because I think it needs to be clear in a document what the costs are.
Yeah, I take the point. Most of the application covers a lot of the elements. I don't know if you can step in here, Dave. You know which one is paid for separately? The knowledge test is separate, isn't it?
Sorry, Chair, I got my mic stuck on mute there. Yes, I do believe it is. I'm not aware of what other things are paid for separately.
If it assists, Chair, I can again, I've made a note of these things. I can look at what elements are included in the fee and what elements are additional, and I can ask those to be added.
I mean, I don't know whether it has to be in this document or not, but I think it maybe should. And obviously, you don't have to put the fee in. It's just that a fee will be charged because it can change whenever. But I think it's clarity then for people coming in and staying in the industry.
Yeah, so it's just the fees that are chargeable beyond the application fee. Yeah, that's fine. I can explore that before the next meeting and clarify that. And that really, members, is where I think I need to be today. We've gone through the preamble in the draft policy. We've gone through the Appendix D that relate to that draft policy, and that's the first third. So I'm happy to take any questions in general about that.
Thanks for that, Chris. And just to members, if you've got any questions, go ahead or just let me know. You can understand the reason why we put it into 3 blocks, because it's a bit of heavy going at times, and I think we've done a great job in the 2.5 hours on part A of this document, and it's best that we do it, I think, like this, and it's because we go into detail and make sure the outcome is right at the end. Any questions for Chris? If not, do you want to just recall then, Chris, about we're staying with the 3 years for the DVLA licence. We're rejigging the information regarding dress code, etc. And one or other 2 issues. So if you just want to recap, and then we know.
Yeah, we're going to explore anything we can do in the future for an app in relation to partially sighted. We're going to reword paragraph 113 of the requirement to do checks in the morning on vehicles, requirement of driver license publications, and also the elements that are charged for over and above the application fee, the license fee. Those are the ones that I've noted that we'll get putting together before the next meeting.
And we're going to look, we're legal if we can put anything about what the driver has to check on the vehicle, whether it's we can.
Yes, that's right. And also, so I've missed one out. Also, the wording. Did you say we're going to leave in the wording on the dress code?
Yeah.
One in, yeah. Yeah, and there's a section we're taking out in respect of the actual clothing that males and females wear. We're taking that piece out.
Thank you for that, Chris.
Yeah.
Have you anything else to add, Mr. Woodrow? And if not, I thank you for your participation at this meeting.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I think we've covered everything that's on my letter to do with drivers. I'm assuming the suggested penalty point scheme, that will be covered in a future meeting.
It will. Yes.
Yep. In that case, no, Chair, thank you.
Any members, any other comments or questions before we wrap this up and say that's part A done?
Yeah, Chair, just thanks to Chris. It's a good report. A lot of nights reading on them though, but they are good. It's nice to get nice to tighten up on policies.
I hope
all I can say is thank goodness for COVID.
Wish everybody well and good reading for the next full meeting.
We've got one other member item on the agenda, Chair, as well.
Oh, we have. Sorry, yeah, I'm getting carried away. So I'll go on to item 8, changes to the issuing of licensing for private hire and that carries vehicles, page 271 to 273.
Yeah.
Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, very, very straightforward, members. It's a very simple report here. Vehicles up to 5 years old currently are issued a licence for 1 year. They're issued a plate for 1 year and a paper licence for 1 year. When the vehicle becomes 5 years old, on the anniversary of its 5th birthday, the next one then is every 6 months. That means any vehicle over 5 years, we undergo 2 processes a year. 2 plates a year are produced, 2 paper licences are produced. In our view, it's time to reconsider what we do. So what we're seeking to do is to issue a 12-month licence across the board for all vehicles. I think this has been raised in the past, and I think the concern for members has been, well, what about the vehicles that are over 5 years old that should be tested every 6 months? The proposal is they will still require a test every 6 months. However, what it will mean is every vehicle will get a 1 year licence. So on renewal, the driver will be notified that the vehicle needs testing at 6 months if it's over 5 years old. It will then go and get the test. The test report will be given back to the council. The vehicle just carries on driving. It saves time for producing 2 licences a year for vehicles over 5 years old. Before you flood me with questions, I think that the main concern in the past has been, well, what if a driver doesn't test his vehicle after 6 months? He'll have effectively a plane that says the vehicle's licensed for 12 months, although he's not done the test after 6 months. We don't feel that'll be an issue. The drivers will be written to and told that you do a test. Our enforcement team will be able to easily produce the vehicles that are overdue, and the vehicles will just be suspended until we conduct the test. And it will be as straightforward as that. We feel it'll be a simple process. It'll be easy to manage. It'll be environmentally more friendly because we're not producing 2 licences every year for vehicles up to 5 years old. So the report today is asking for your permission for this concept, this process, to be put out to public consultation for 4 weeks. I do know that the vast majority of the trade are in favour of this, but we feel it's appropriate to seek permission for a 4-week consultation and then come back to you with the findings with a view to implementing this procedure. It is as simple as
Thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, I'm happy to approve for it to go to consultation for 4 weeks. Starting from when though, Chris?
I would say now, after this meeting, I've got another meeting. I've got quite a significant amount of work to do tomorrow, so I'm not going to be in a position to do much with it until next Tuesday after the bank holiday. So, in fairness, I would say from maybe Wednesday next week, but a week from now, we'll give it time to get the consultation papers prepared and then get it off. But a week from now.
Yeah, to me that sounds sensible. Not excluding the Easter holidays, because obviously that takes a chunk of days out of people where they've got other things on their mind.
Absolutely. So that's the report, that's the application, if members are happy to approve.
All members agree with that. If you just If you'd say no, I'll take that as approval.
Agree.
I've got lots of people coming and agree. Okay, yeah, I think that's okay, Chris, for that to go out to consultation.
I think I've just worn you all down. That's fine. I do apologise. That's fine. Thank you very much indeed, councillors. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank everybody for their attendance and their input, because, as I say, I don't think we'd have got, well, we would have got through the whole document, but I think we'd have been here at supper time. Okay, thank you everybody, and that's it. I'll close the meeting.
Thank you very much.